Hi, today I want to share a story with you. It's a story about a little girl who made the most out of being the only one for most of her life. First, I'm going to share a bit about her childhood to explain when this feeling began in her family environment. Then we'll take a look at her educational and professional journey to see how being the only one had its challenges, but ended up bringing her to her ultimate place in life. Sounds like a pretty sweet story, huh? Well, unfortunately, it does come with its ups and downs, but you can decide for yourself if it was all worth it. I grew up in the Bronx in New York City, raised by my Puerto Rican mom and my Puerto Rican dad, my stepdad, but he was just dad. My neighborhood was pretty chill. I guess you can say that I grew up in the better part of town, but you can take that with a grain of salt. Raised like an only child, despite having two older brothers, but they were much older. I had a few cousins around me, and then everyone else lived on the island. So much immediate family, not much immediate family stateside. Familial ties were really difficult to maintain because of the distance. Most women in my family were single moms with lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Hence, their children lived with limited resources. Then there was me. I was one of the few who was raised with a dad that provided financially and was able to afford me a few privileges that most of my cousins just didn't have. Now, don't get me wrong, these privileges, nothing fancy. My dad wasn't a finance guy or a lawyer. He worked in a factory, long hours. And most of those privileges that I mentioned, I'm talking about going shopping for new clothes before school starts, having actual gifts under the Christmas tree, and maybe going on a few weekend trips in the summer to go camping or something like that. But being the only one with these few things felt weird at times, a little lonely, because I was the only one. So it was no surprise when I started feeling these same feelings in school. It was easy for me to get good grades. That wasn't necessarily a popular trait. Being raised by a very strict Puerto Rican mother didn't allow for me to have normal socialization, which eventually got me misconstrued by my peers in one way or another. So I was excited to go to high school to get a fresh start. And it just so happens that I received a full scholarship to go to this fancy high school in Massachusetts. So I bounced. I was out of there. Now I won't be the only one, right? I'll be with other students that are similar to me. No, the fancy high school was Phillips Andover Academy. And you want to talk about being the only one? Yeah. The only Puerto Rican, the only Latina in my entire class. Challenging, lonely at times, but I started to understand the strength in being the only one. So I had my college interview for Boston University. Let's fast forward because that'll take the speech to about an hour. I have my college interview for Boston University with the Dean of Admissions over a bucket of KFC, watching a football game at one of the admissions counselors' home from my high school. Let that marinate for a minute. Okay. So going to Andover had its privileges. All right. And in college, the idea of being the only one took a whole different life. Okay. It was now a completely different ballgame. We're now adults that had no problem pointing out differences in not so nice ways, had no problems asking inappropriate questions, no problems making inaccurate assumptions about people, intentionally, purposefully putting you down because they felt they had the right to, right? The right to because of some hierarchical culture or structure that gave them the right and the privilege to. And in college, I was no longer the only one. But boy, did I feel like it. A predominantly white institution, I came to learn, is one of the most violent and unwelcoming spaces for a first-gen Latinx student when you aren't armed with the understanding that being the only one holds much power. I took this power with me into my professional career where I spent some time in corporate America in about 15 years in marketing and advertising. Hands down, always the only one in the boardroom, at the table, right, on the account team, etc. But I now felt like a superhero. Okay. Now being the only one was my superpower. And I decided that my community needed to be informed of this. So I brought that superpower to a space where it was desperately needed, academia, because according to the census, less than 2% of the population has a PhD, and less than 1% of that number are Latinas, and a tiny slice of that number teach in the discipline of business. My name is Dr. Jess Vega Centeno, and I'm a unicorn with a superpower in the business of transforming lives. Thank you for your time today.